for those folks that are online, there's a chat function and a Q&A function. If you guys have questions during the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Also, let us know actually in the chat where you're from, so we can get an idea as to how our reach has been. I know there's been a lot of interest in Ontario for this, but also outside the province too. So I'd like to know where you guys are from. The numbers keep creeping up, so this is great. Excellent. Oh, I see New Brunswick in there. Oh, fantastic. Oh, Newfoundland. Right on. Well, I'll make sure I have lots of cod jokes then tonight. Okay, so we might as well get rolling as more people come through. You may have heard through this that we are recording this session. For those of you that aren't able to make it or that wanted to come tonight but couldn't make it, we will record this webinar. It will be posted. We'll send out a YouTube link for this once we get the edited version out. We will post it on the PIC and ON websites, and it'll be there for you for reference later. The session is brought to you as a partnership, actually, with University of Guelph, Animal Health Lab, Ontario Animal Health Network, Poultry Industry Council, OMAFRA, and Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So to start this off, and welcome everyone, I'm Al Dam. So I am your poultry specialist with the Ontario government. I deal with all things to do with feathers in this province. Besides just the commercial poultry, I deal with small flock and game bird and what else? Waterfowl, squab. I don't deal with rat tights, although we do tonight. We will refer to rat tights also because they are poultry. We have a number of great speakers. Dr. Lucy Rosca is my counterpart at OMAFRA. She's our poultry vet. Dr. Avian Price is a private veterinarian who's also co-chair of the Ontario Animal Health Network Small Flock Network. Dr. Cynthia Philips is with us from the Inspection Agency. She's going to talk later tonight on some of our what you will see with AI positive birds and go through the process of what happens if we have a positive small flock. And Dr. Jennifer Martin is with us also. She's not speaking tonight until we bring her in and ask her some really hard questions at the end. Now, as I mentioned before, if you have any questions as we go along, put them in the Q&As, and we'll try and work through this also. So, as I mentioned before, we have a great lineup, and I think right now I'll just pass it right over to Erin.
Thanks, Al. Just gonna share my screen here. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules tonight to come join us. This is a seminar on avian influenza. We hope you're all feeling good tonight, probably just getting home after a busy day. And we're really glad that you can be here with us. So I wanted to start off, Al kind of rolled through the intros there. He's our provincial poultry specialist at OMAFRA. I'm gonna just start us off tonight with some context for the seminar. My name's Erin Price. I'm a small flock vet and I'm the ON co-lead. And then Lucy is gonna chat with us a bit about a status update on AI in the world and specifically in North America. She's the poultry veterinarian for OMAFRA and my co-lead with ON. And then Dr. Cynthia Philips is going to go through some of the clinical signs of AI and the CFI response. And then it's back over to Al for some biosecurity tips. He and I are going to chat about some case studies where we'll go over, what happens with certain situations. And then all of us will kind of join in at the end with some Q&A and next steps. We're excited to be able to offer this, and we have quite a few groups gathered here tonight. It's no small feat to get everyone in the same room, so I think it says quite a lot about its importance to all of us that we're wanting to come together to discuss AI and small flocks. I wanted to give you a summary of these groups and their roles because we'll be kind of referring to them throughout. So CFIA, that's our Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Their role is to safeguard food, animal, and plant health. We've got OMAFRA, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and they're responsible for safety, stewardship, and economics of agri-food. PIC, they're our lovely hosts for tonight, and they're Poultry Industry Council. So they do a lot of event and project and program management, as well as research. ON, that's the Ontario Animal Health Network. So that's a collaborative environment between vets, owners, and industry with respect to animal disease and education. And then CWHC, the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and their role is to promote and protect wildlife and Canadian health. So we thought it would be a good idea to give you a bit of context for this presentation. My name's Erin Price. I'm the owner of Hockley Valley and Ottawa Valley Mobile Vet Services. We see dogs, cats, bees, and most backyard poultry. We're 2 vets and soon to be 3, and we service a large part of Ontario with a telemedicine option as well for those who don't have access to a local poultry vet. And we see quite a bit of poultry, so it's kind of given me a bit of a unique perspective. I'm very much involved in this world, so I know that there's a lack of resources and vet care for backyard poultry keepers. We also know that since the last AI outbreak in Canada and in 2015, and especially with COVID, there are more poultry keepers, and there's really been an increase not just in chickens, but also with ducks, geese, swans, turkeys, pigeons, quail, pheasants, and even emus and ostriches now. And we've been seeing some, a lot of good questions, also some myths out there about AI recently. So we really wanted to provide a forum to discuss some of these questions and some of the situations that might arise. So I wanted to provide a list of some of these questions and myths that we're seeing around AI that will hopefully aim to answer with this presentation, but we're also going to have time for Q&A at the end and kind of throughout. So like Al said, if you want to type those questions into the Q&A section, we'll try to track them and answer. And there's an option for upvoting them as well. So if someone's already asked that question, but that was one you really want an answer to, go ahead and click on that and we'll really focus on those. So some of the myths that we've been seeing, this is one we see quite a lot. The government's trying to get us to call our birds. We also get that there are going to be call zones for AI, so that the government's going to basically come in and nuke all the birds in a certain area. We get that humans can't get AI, pigeons can't get AI. This one comes up quite a bit too. So this is something that's happened in the past. Why are we concerned about it this year? And then what can I do to prevent it? So some of the biosecurity tips will kind of help with that tonight, hopefully. And is there a vaccine for it? Can I eat affected animals and their products, so meat or eggs from these birds? And then what about their compost? A lot of us are using compost on our gardens. And then how long do my birds need to be inside? So for folks who are trying to, be more biosecure this year and keep them away from wild birds, how long do they have to be inside? Or is a covered run okay? So allowing some access to outdoor, and for how long? A lot of backyard poultry keepers also have ponds on their properties if they're in the country. And how are they going to keep these birds away, especially if their waterfowl, for instance, are commingling with some of the wild waterfowl? And then do I need to remove bird feeders? And then what signs are there? So what am I going to see in my flock? And how long does it take for birds to die? And then if I get it, not only what's going to happen, so what's the CFI response going to be like, but how long is the ground infectious? And how do I clean up after? And then finally, the big one, who pays for this? So who pays for the testing? Will there be indemnity? Those kinds of things. So I've been seeing a lot of this kind of pop up over and over again. And I was concerned that there wasn't really enough information out there for folks to recognize AI and who to call when they do, or where to find reliable information on it. So we wanted to provide an update on the current situation, hopefully before it gets to Ontario, which I think we've done, thankfully, and where to go to get updates and reliable information on this. We wanted to really stress to the small flock community that our goal here, it really is to be collaborative. You know, obviously I've mentioned I have birds as well. We're all obviously very invested in the community, and the last thing we want is for folks to have to call their birds. So we're hoping to be able to work together to help to protect the public, vets, and you know, things like our commercial food sources are really important to protect as well. So it's a process really, and hopefully by working together and, you know, putting in place some good biosecurity and being really diligent this year, we can protect ourselves and the community at the same time, so to speak. It's also moving fairly quickly, and it could be hitting any day now. So we wanted to try to get, you know, some information out there and be as prepared as possible. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Lucy. She's the OMA for poultry vet, and she's going to kind of give an update on the current avian influenza situation in the world, and particularly in North America, and where to, you know, really find info on it going forward.
Thank you, Erin, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Lucy Yoska. I've been working for Ontario Ministry of Agriculture since 2010 with Animal Welfare Branch, and I'm taking care about the ministry poultry file for the past year or so. My presentation will be focused on general information about avian influenza and the present status of the disease in the world and across the North American continent. A little bit of information about the avian influenza. It's highly contagious viral disease which occurs primarily in poultry, wild birds, and shorebirds. The classification of avian influenza viruses is based on pathogenicity, and it's so pathogenicity is the ability to make the birds sick. Based on that, they are highly pathogenic, high paths that they will create severe disease and significant mortality, but also low pathogenic avian influenza viruses with mild clinical mortalities. Also, the viruses, they can be classified based on the surface protein, the same as like spike protein and COVID virus. There are about 16 serotypes of hemagglutinin, which are this. And then the most important ones are H5, H7, with potential to be high pathogenic avian influenza viruses, and also 9 types of neuraminidase. Different combinations of the H and N proteins create different serotypes. Also, classification of avian viruses, it's based on virus lineage, means geographic location of the origin, Eurasian and North American lineages. The current high path avian influenza virus, it's a Eurasian lineage, H5N1, with first detection back in December last year in Newfoundland in Labrador, and January 13 with wild ducks in South Carolina. This is a global distribution of the virus and the outbreak of across the world. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is publishing monthly the global avian influenza viruses outbreaks. The last report has been in February 23rd. You can see a lot of clusters in China, Africa, mostly in Europe, and east of United States and Canada. The same global distribution is showing us the based on the number of the outbreaks of H5N1 being the most predominant one in the world, but also across the continents, Europe being hit that hard. It's been estimated about 37 million poultry died or have been killed since September 21st. since we spoke about Europe, Europe has been hit hard this year, and then I can say they have had not a break since last year in spring. Normally they would have a break between the migratory seasons. However, summer was as busy as spring and fall. And mostly October 21st, Europe had experienced almost 1,000 outbreaks in poultry and captive flocks, and almost 2,000 wild birds with high PAT detection. World Health Organization stated back in November last year that various subtypes of high PAT avian influenza viruses have been reported by more than 40 countries over the last 6 months. And during this high-risk period, October to April, the countries need to scale up surveillance efforts, implement strict biosecurity measures, and ensure a timely reporting of outbreak to curb its spread. This is a recently map that has been put together, and the distribution data includes laboratory confirmed cases of high PAT AI H5 and H5N1 viruses reported by United States Department of Agriculture, Canada Food Inspection Agency, World Organization of Animal Health, state agriculture, and natural resources management agencies. Moving to our continent. So in the United States, and you have a link near the title with the confirmation of the number of the highly pathogenic avian influenza in commercial and backyard flocks. Both categories being hit hard. Overall, there are about 14 states with 24 H5N1 outbreaks, about over 2,600,000 birds affected, but also United States has reported 307 wild birds detected to be infected with H5N1 in 21 states. They're stable with the numbers of outbreaks. Almost every day we do hear a announcement or a declaration that another outbreak happened in United States. So it's close to our border. What about Canada? We did have some outbreaks starting in December in Newfoundland in 2 small flocks, about 438 birds, followed by Nova Scotia with a backyard flock in February, and a mixed poultry with 960 birds, but a commercial turkey flock of more than 11,000 birds in February the 3rd. In terms of wild birds, Canadian Wildlife Health Corporation identified about 16 H5N1 infected birds in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, but also in British Columbia. With this British Columbia, the bald eagle bird, it has been confirmed that virus has been detected in all 4 flyways across North America. So how these birds got here? As you may know, there are some flyways for the migratory birds that they move south and then come north. North America is crossed by 4 flyways. It's Atlantic, Mississippi, Central, and Pacific. In Ontario, most of the flyways are crossed by Mississippi and Atlantic. Data reported in combination with recent high PAT findings in east of Canada pointed to this being the first documented introduction of Eurasian origin of high PAT in the wild birds via the Atlantic flyway. The potential introduction pathway likely includes wild birds migratory routes from Northern Europe that overlap Arctic regions of North America, and then dispersal farther south to Canada and United States. It is a more like a stepwise movement that started spring 2021 up to Greenland and down in November to east coast of Canada. The second picture is showing up a doubling duck movement from Carolina states to north. The blue-winged teal are one of the 11 doubling ducks species that regularly breed in North America. The doubling ducks are the primary waterfowl species known to carry and shed the avian influenza viruses in North America. It's been a study of intercontinental movement data dated as started in 1960 up to 2021 for about 41 years, focused on bird banding in Carolina states. And then about 65% recovered in Atlantic Flyway, 34% in Atlantic and Mississippi, and only 2% in Atlantic and Central. And why the avian influenza, it is a concern, of course, increasing the disease outbreaks, increasing the risk of Ontario. For Ontario, first of all, is not a food safety risk. However, it can be zoonotic, and it is low risk for general public, but can be spread to humans that are in direct contact with live birds. Also, low pathogenic H5, H7 viruses can evolve to highly pathogenic viruses. From the economic point of view, high mortality in domestic poultry, especially turkeys and chickens, is rapid spread between farms and flocks if strict biosecurity is not in place, and serious production, economic, and trade losses. Other, as we discussed, the migratory birds are the reservoirs for avian influenza viruses, but are often asymptomatic. Risk increases with spring and fall global migration, and pigs are susceptible to avian influenza viruses, and infections in pigs can result in new strains of avian influenza. There is always a discussion about like what means poultry, non-poultry definition, and the World Health Organization Terrestrial Code changed the definition back in May last year. The poultry definition means all birds reared or kept in captivity to produce any commercial animal products or for breeding for this purpose. The non-poultry definition are birds that are kept in a single household, the products of which are used within the same household exclusively, are not considered poultry, provided that they have no direct or indirect contact with poultry or poultry facilities. And also non-poultry definition comprises of birds that they are kept in captivity for other reasons, including those that are kept for shows, racing, exhibition, zoological collection and competition, and for breeding or selling for those purposes. What that means for small flocks is that regardless of which poultry is being affected were declared it being positive for H5, H7, or H5N1 now, the same conditions are going to be applied. The only difference between poultry and non-poultry is the trade is not going to be affected if non-poultry are having an outbreak. I put a couple of slides about roles and responsibilities. Just so you know, if there is an outbreak, Canadian Food Inspection Agency is going to take the lead under Health of Animal Act. They are taking care about disease farm animals. They confirm detection, response, containment, and eradication of the disease. They control, they make the surveillance, the zoning, international reporting for federal reported with disease, but they also order destruction and disposal for infected animals and provide association compensation. They also establish disease-free status and lead communication with international trading partners and provide international disease response. My ministry, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, it's licensed between the CFIA, the Animal Health Laboratory, the Federal Board Command Center, and other poultry groups, but also the license between other government groups such as Ministry of Health, Public Health Unit, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Natural Resources, and also my ministry is supporting One Health approach and supports one farm disposal of dead stock once these released by other ministries that they are being involved with the outbreaks. The Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, they do perform disease surveillance in wild birds. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, they lead the national market interruption and recovery response. Ministry of Environment, they do recommendations related to the animal disposal. Ministry of Natural Resources, they do policy recommendations and assistance to prevent the spread of the disease to wildlife. The Solicitor General, they are taking care about the animal welfare, law enforcement, support, security, road closures, and support of the emergency response. And last but not least, the Federal Board Command Center and Ontario Association of Poultry Veterinarians, they do provide knowledge and technical guidance to government and producers, but also they communicate with producers and Ontario poultry industry members. As a general response to avian influenza A in domestic animals, under Animal Health Act reporting requirements, samples positive for influenza A in any species are reported to OMAFRA. Influenza A cases in swine, equine, and dogs are monitored. In terms of influenza A in poultry, the H5, H7 strains are federal reportable disease and are reported to CFIA and OMAFRA, and CFIA takes response actions to contain and eliminate the infection. Non-H5 and H7 strains, they're part of OMAFRA and Ministry of Health response. Who to call if you suspect avian influenza in your flock? First of all, I think if you do find your birds are infected, you as a bird owner, you are legally responsible to notify your veterinarian or the nearest Canadian Food Inspection Agency Animal Health District if there is a suspicion of avian influenza. We're strongly encouraging to call your local veterinary clinic to establish a contact and see if they can offer small flock veterinary services. So in case if there's an outbreak, you don't panic, so you know who to call. If you spot a sick or dead wild bird, it's a different story. You are encouraged to contact the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, but please do not touch that bird. It can be contagious. Also be prepared to submit details like where to find the bird or discuss options for carcass submission to allow them to gather information about the health of wild population. I could not finish up my meeting, and I feel like I'm professionally responsible and obligated to discuss a little bit about the shows, the poultry shows, the swap meets. Be careful, the prevention is the key. It is strongly suggested to avoid attending shows, sales, and swap meets during high-risk period of transmission of AI, including the spring and fall wild bird migration periods, and especially during the disease outbreak. Just to keep in mind that attending poultry events can increase the risk of spreading diseases, and they are most often transmitted from one infected flock to another flock by infected birds or contaminated people or equipment. Moving infected birds can result in transferring avian influenza virus to a new location. And if it's moved through another auction or swap meet, then the AA virus can be transferred to multiple new locations. They can appear to be healthy, but they can be infected and can transmit avian influenza to other birds before exhibiting any signs of disease themselves. I know it's been like a tough 2 years with the COVID outbreaks, and now we would like to go out and show our birds, but just keep in mind that it is very possible that they can get infected. So keep that in mind and follow up strict biosecurity rules at least. That's all I have so far. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lucy. While we're on here, we actually have a few questions that I'd like to try and address with our group. So one of the first questions is there any type of vaccine that can help with the severity of this virus? And if not, why? You want to take that one, Lucy?
I think I can answer this question. So we can take an example from the European Union. So even like yesterday, I read an article about like France being hit the hardest in Europe. They were even considering to vaccinate their flocks. They haven't had, like I said, they haven't had a break in a summertime. So like from spring and fall, and then now they're hitting hard. The problem is that the commercial vaccine that is available right now do not match the virus. So China has been developed something, but is not available for marketing. So let's say if you would to vaccinate them with the actual vaccine, is not going to protect the birds. It's a different strain, and it's a very, very aggressive strain, about 90% or so mortality. So
Yeah. And I think
did I answer your question?
Well, I think the other issue we have in Ontario, or sorry, in Canada, is that we have an AI-free status with the world in terms of trade. So if we start vaccinating for birds, that becomes, we lose that status also. So I know that doesn't impact folks on the small flock side, but it does impact us on the commercial side, especially with genetics.
What is Europe stating right now is that like the environment is so contaminated with avian influenza virus, then they may become endemic and they may have to leave it. So they, regardless how much precautions they do, and then they use all tools of biocontainment or biosecurity, it is very hard to stop the outbreaks. And then that's why they're considering. We're not at that stage, but it may come to us too.
Yeah. Another question, can we bring it in on our hands or clothing to our pet birds? Yes, that's a hard yes, especially if you've been handling a bird that has been sick. That's why you should listen to your mother. Wash your hands. I'll be talking about that in my biosecurity talk. Another question, can all birds carry this virus, including songbirds?
It is possible. In east of Canada, when they do their testing right now, every single bird that is coming to the laboratory, and they found it. They found it in crows, they found it in raptors, they found it everywhere. Some they do not show up clinical signs, and those are the carriers.
Yeah. Let's see. I heard rodents can spread AI. Is that true? Thinking more from as a mechanical vector, and I will talk about rodent control and rodents and concerned rodents in my biosecurity talk.
Between mice and rats, yes, yeah. Yes.
Is high path AI already in Ontario? Are there any cases reported yet? We can thankfully say
no.
No.
Not as today.
Yep. Is it safe to purchase chicks from hatcheries? Yes. At this point, so hatcheries. So this disease will impact, like if a bird is sick with avian influenza, the egg, it doesn't get passed on the egg, but if it's sick with influenza, chances are it won't be able to lay a fertile egg anyways. And the last question, will sanctioned poultry shows not be allowed, or can they proceed? So this goes a little bit with your last slide there. So what, I guess it depends on what you mean by sanctioned. Right now, we don't have avian influenza in the province. We are recommending that probably don't attend shows. If you decide to do that, that's a risk. If we get avian influenza in the province, we'll have to reevaluate that.
Is it United States where they do have one state that they closed up?
Yeah,
yes.
I was going to bring up Delaware. So state of Delaware had a bat. They're dealing with it right now. They were planning on having some small flock shows until they started getting, until they got infected, and then the state vet actually shut down every poultry event in the state. So it has been done, and it's been done to protect everyone. And I guess one of the questions that one of the concerns or comments that are made about why we're doing this is that we're not doing this to take your birds away or stop shows, but we're trying to do it to protect the birds that we have. Let's see, here's another one on behalf of Greg. Will this shut down the show if it gets bad? Will this shut down the show if it gets bad? Once again, it depends on the severity and how badly we get it in Ontario. If we get it, if we have great biosecurity, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it never comes. It's a wait and see. We're going to talk about what are symptoms. I'm going to pass that one off, or we'll pass that one off to Cynthia when she does her talk. Who's next? What are the common symptoms to look at for chickens? Once again, that's a Cynthia Philips question. Can mice spread the virus? We're going to talk about that in my talk. And is high-path AI in bird droppings only? It is fecal oral, but it can be respiratory. I think that covers it for now. I think, yeah. So I think we've addressed majority of those questions now. I'll let Charlotte clear them off as we go. But thank you, Lucy. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we will pass the next update on to Dr. Cynthia Philips from CFIA. There you are, Cynthia. I will let you take it from here.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. While I get settled with my screen. Okay. So good evening. My name is Dr. Cynthia Philips. I'm a poultry veterinarian. I practiced for 23 years in the Ontario poultry industry, and I joined CFI 8 months ago. So this evening, my portion of the webinar is to present an overview of the disease recognition, as well as what to expect from the CFI disease response. Okay. So how do we recognize highly pathogenic avian influenza? In a way, it can be tricky because there's no specific sign. So we will look at signs, we will look at some pictures, but as one first takeaway is there's nothing specific. Often the first signs that may be seen is a sudden increase in mortality. And if we see that in the flock, we should be alerted. So also the context can be very important because there's some high-risk context that can also make us think more about avian influenza just from the increased risk. So, I gave the example, okay, maybe one possibility is simply to notice maybe no clinical signs other than sudden increase in mortality, which can be quite dramatic. But if I take the example of a case we had in the Maritimes recently, the clinical picture goes like this. There were 3 dead chickens and 14 healthy looking ducks. And so that's not exactly dramatic. But if we look at it a bit more closely, there was 3 dead chickens out of 3. So all of the chickens died. And the ducks, which typically do not exhibit clinical signs, well, they didn't. If we look a little bit more at the farm, well, all the birds had access to outdoor. There was a pond on site, and there were wild ducks also on site. And so, all these populations of wild and domestic birds were commingling. So that's, what I mean by paying attention to context. So even though 3 dead birds may not have seemed dramatic, actually, when we look a little bit, when we put the context in place, it actually was. So some of the high-risk context. So here I illustrated the presence of wild waterfowl in close proximity to a barn. If your flock consists of a mixed species, especially waterfowl and other poultry like chickens, turkeys, the presence of a pond where wild waterfowl may gather. So if on your farm, your flock consists of mixed avian species, including waterfowls that have access to outdoor with a pond and wild birds on site, it is a high-risk context. We're going to go through a series of questions or elements to also help you rank the risk of getting infected, of your flock getting infected with high-path avian influenza, would the virus find its way in the area. Oops, sorry. So starting with, are there migratory waterfowl present in where you're located? Is there a flock confirmed with avian influenza nearby? How close is the nearest poultry farm? Are you fairly isolated or not? Is there a domestic waterfowl flock nearby? Is there waterfowl present on your farm? Do birds from your flock have access to outdoor? What about the pond, right? How close is the nearest surface water? Do family members or employees have contact with wild waterfowl such as through activities like hunting. And so we've talked a lot about waterfowls, but there's also other types of wild birds that can bring high path AI to your flock, such as starlings. Are they able to enter the barn and eat from the feeders? Continuing, is your flock made of multiple ages of birds, and especially long-lived older birds? Do farm employees have contact with other poultry? Then thinking of traffic, how many people drove onto your farm per week in the past month? Are the deliveries, like your feed deliveries, for example, are they made by companies that service the commercial poultry farms, right? Is there a link between your farm and commercial poultry? Dead bird disposal. So are the carcasses stored and or disposed of in close proximity to a poultry barn? And the bedding material storage area, right? Is the storage area for bedding, is that contamination, stored in a manner which prevent contamination by wild birds? And in general, what pest control measures are in place? So this is a series of, again, elements to help you gauge your risk level, again, would the virus find itself in the area. So now let's look at the clinical signs. They may not be specific, but there are some, right? So we already mentioned several times the high and sudden mortality rate. You may find a very quiet birds, very quiet flock, and depressed birds. If your birds are laying eggs, you may see a marked drop in egg production, and many of the eggs produced may have soft shell or even be shell-less. You may see diarrhea. You may see hemorrhages on the hawk. You may see swelling also on the face, so under the skin, the swelling of the skin under the eyes, wattles, and comb. We have a few pictures. So that's a picture of a chicken showing lethargy and depression. As we said, the first sign you may see is mortality on this picture, also showing diarrhea. The production of soft shell eggs or shell-less eggs. And then the swelling of the wattles, comb, and face. And then finally, the hemorrhages on the shank that you may also see. Okay. So when should you notify CFIA? Well, if you suspect high path AI, either from the clinical signs, right, increased mortality, maybe swelling, or those non-specific signs, and with or the high-risk context, please contact your local CFIA office. There is also a CFIA 24/7 hotline that can be reached. For reference, I have included all the CFIA contact information for animal health services in Ontario. Okay, so moving next, so CFIA has been notified. So what should we expect next? So as soon as CFIA has been notified, it triggers a number of actions. And so let's look at what happens first on the infected premises of the suspect premises. Well, CFIA will come on site and do sample collection. And there might have been samples already submitted to a local lab, like the Animal Health Laboratory in Guelph, for example. We may already have preliminary laboratory results, but regardless, there will be another set of samples taken, and these samples will be sent to the National Center for Animal Disease in Winnipeg. And with this step, we confirm whether the flock is positive or negative for avian influenza. At the same time, there will be a premises investigation initiated. And there will also be movement controls initiated, such as quarantine and declaration of infected place. If the flock is confirmed positive for highly pathogenic avian influenza, it will be depopulated. After the depopulation comes the disposal of dead birds and of contaminated material. Following that comes the step of cleaning and disinfection to eliminate the virus. Once the cleaning, disinfection, or C&D is completed and approved, there is a 21-day waiting period, which eventually leads to restocking. So I will now present some details of these steps, starting with the investigation. What information will CFI be looking for? And also flock records like mortality, egg production, feed and water intake. If you have any veterinary records and laboratory reports, I'll be looking for a detailed description of the farm management practices. Any records of purchase or sale of feed, poultry, etc. Any movement that'll be traced back for movement on and off the property during the last 21 days, such as feed truck, or power or gas, farm visitor logbooks, and a site map of the farm, and finally contact information for your local veterinarian. If your farm is placed under quarantine, what does that mean to you? What type of responsibilities do you then have? Well, first it starts with needing permission from CFI to move birds, bird byproducts, and poultry-related equipment on and off the property. You need to ensure that footwear, as well as vehicles leaving the property, have been cleaned and disinfected. You need to apply strict biosecurity measures for yourself and any employees. Maintain fences and gates around the farm to control the movement of people on and off the premises. You need to keep all birds indoors while the quarantine is in place. Report all sick and dying birds and any bird that escaped the farm. Implement vermin, feral animal, or wildlife control measures. Keep dogs, cats, and other household pets confined. So other species can also sometimes catch influenza. They can also spread the disease as mechanical carriers or fomites. Okay. Inform everyone that's entering the farm that the farm is under quarantine. And important to limit on-farm visitors to really essential services only. Okay. And then a few words about depopulation, disposal, and compensation. So if the flock needs to be depopulated, it is done humanely with approved methods. The disposal is done in accordance with provincial requirements. 3 common methods may be burial, composting, and incineration. And under the Health of Animal Act, the CFI may compensate for animals and things ordered destroyed. Okay, so that's really giving an overview for the infected premises. But these steps do not take place in isolation. So while the process is happening at the infected premises, there are also actions that take place in the area and beyond. So if we go back to from the initial notification, we have the sample collection, investigation, movement controls, and probably before the flock is even depopulated, there'll be an establishment of an avian influenza control zone, which we will talk about in a minute. And also, Dr. Lucy spoke about that there'll be a notification to the World Organization for Animal Health, or the OIE. So starting with the notification to the OIE, important takeaways is it's an international reporting obligation that we have. So all cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza must be reported to the OIE, whether it be commercial flocks, backyard flocks, wild birds, or other captive birds. And the reporting takes place according to the OIE definitions of poultry and non-poultry, which Dr. Lucy showed us. Important to understand that it's strictly a reporting. It has trade implications, but the reporting or the notification to the OIE and the disease response are separate activities. So we report to the OIE according to how we need to report to the OIE, and in Canada, we respond to highly pathogenic avian influenza the way we deem necessary. Okay, now moving on to now the control zone. So there will be an establishment of an AI control zone, and that's a zone that is made of a 10-kilometer radius from the infected premises. And within that zone, there are movement controls placed. And that 10-kilometer radius really can be subdivided into 2 subzones. The first one is called the infected zone, and it's made of from 0 to 3 kilometers. So any poultry premises that is either in that zone infected, also the contact premises. So even if it's not in that 0 to 3, but maybe there's been exchanges of birds or equipment or sharing of equipment, they will be the same movement controls. And then the movement controls consist of quarantine and declaration of infected place. And then in the restricted zone, the 3 to 10-kilometer zone, there will be requirements to quarantine. This is an example of an avian influenza control zone. This was actually the first one that was established in Newfoundland in December with the infected premise, the index case in the middle. And then if we take the red and orange circles, that represents the infected zone or 0 to 3-kilometer radius. And then from the other boundary of the orange circle all the way to the end of the green circle, this represents the restricted zone or the 3 to 10-kilometer radius. And all the dots you see are all the premises that have poultry in that 10-kilometer radius. Okay, what else happens? Right, so we've identified, we've established a control zones, and then so for the premises in the AI control zone, there will be surveillance activities taking place. And there are a number of them, starting with the sick birds call. So that consists of a avian influenza information sheet with a CFI phone number on it, and a veterinarian that's available to answer that sick bird hotline and fill out a premise investigation questionnaire if need be. For the poultry premises in the infected zone, there is baseline surveillance. So as we identify the premises, there is initial testing to confirm the status for avian influenza. And then in both the infected zone and restricted zone, there is dead bird surveillance as well as the flock health checks that is done. The dead bird surveillance consists of swabbing up to 5 dead birds per barn, either twice a week in the infected zone or weekly in the restricted zone. And the flock health checks, that consists of a series of questions to gauge the health of the flock. So making sure there is no changes in mortality rate, egg production, water intake, feed intake, that type of thing. For the premises located in the infected zone, before live poultry or eggs, for example, can be moved, there is surveillance. There is testing done on live birds called pre-movement surveillance. And finally, as the case progresses, and when we can talk about releasing the quarantine, then there is testing done prior to that for the premises located in the infected zone. So a little bit more about the release of movement control. And so that release can start at least 21 days after the disposal of infected birds. For the infected premises, The movement controls can be released, if you remember all the steps, once the cleaning and disinfection is completed and after the 21-day waiting period is over. And just opening a parenthesis again on the notification to the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health. At that point of time, we can close the case. We can notify the OIE that the case is closed. For the premises that are located in the control zone, for the ones in the infected zone, the movement controls can be released with continued surveillance results in the AI control zone and the negative results from the quarantine release testing. For poultry premises located in the restricted zone, so the 3 to 10 kilometer radius, the movement control release can be, the movement controls can be released with the continued negative surveillance results in the AI control zone. Okay, that completes sort of the cycle of what to expect. And before I leave you, I'd like to show you what bird migration can look like in North America. I'm going to be using, we're going to look at 3 short videos from the United States data. And so just to, before I start the video, we have the date. So here is from March 9, 2022, so yesterday. And we will see, we see the number of birds in flights per million. We have a scale, a color scale to indicate from low to high the migration traffic rate. And we'll have an idea of the time of the day with the red bar. You'll see the red bar go across, showing the sunset, and then the yellow bar showing the sunrise. So let's look at what the bird migration looks like at the current time. Okay, so it peaks around 14 million birds, right? It's ranking low in the scale of migration traffic rate still. Despite that, please keep in mind that in the United States, new cases of new detections are happening very regularly, even with the slow migration rate. Then I selected close to Easter. And why is that? That's because the last time in Ontario, last time we had high path AI in Ontario was in 2015. And we got the call of the first case on Easter Sunday. And so we can go back, we can select a date. So I selected a year ago, roughly around Easter. And so let's see in just a few weeks what the bird migration will look like. Right, so it peaks around 1 million birds now, and look at, we're starting to see, you know, a high traffic rate, and look at how much more of the area it covers. Needless to say, the birds do not magically stop at the border, right? And then I selected a third date, which is middle of May, to see how it evolves. Right, so it's just massive. Now we're up to, you know, close to 640 million birds in flight, and look at how much of the territory it covers. And, you know, make no mistake, these birds are then in Canada, right? And before that, we'll see them in Canada before that. But that's to please keep that visual in mind, that we know this year that wild birds are positive for high path AI H5N1. And these birds are coming, right? Today, you saw the difference in the 3 scenarios. Today, maybe it's still low, and despite the slow, what is considered low migration rate, we see regular incursions or detections in the United States. We have a few cases in the Maritimes. It's coming, so be alert is the key, the take-home message. And with that, I think I will stop sharing.
Great. Okay, thanks, Cynthia. We actually have another whack of questions we'll go through, and whether yourself or Lucy or I can answer them, we'll go through it. So there's the, can mice spread the virus again? I guess we can say yes, because you're actually looking at rodent controls with your control, but I guess it's as much from the fact that they can carry the virus from one place to the next as opposed to being infected with, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, how close do birds need to be to transmit the virus to one another?
So within the flock, it will go through. It takes a decent separation, and really, that spread can vary according to the conditions. So under the right conditions, would it be wind and humidity and all that? It can be carried, not by long distance, but in the States in 2015, I think within 1 to 3 kilometers we could see spread. Right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention here is that, the other thing to mention is that it can be in the environment also, right? So it's fecal oral. Yep. So if someone is, just say, stepping in some goose poop from an infected bird, and its conditions are right. So what are the right conditions for the virus to last in the environment?
So keep in mind the virus is not it's a protein and needs a vector to be transmitted. So it will be through the droplets, it will be through the feces. It's not going to travel alone. So he needs a little bit of something to be carried to. So
yeah,
that's great points.
Yeah, and that could be us, right? So we could step, whether like today, the virus will last longer in cooler weather than in warm weather or hot weather. So if we are if we step in something and track it into our flock, we could step in something at the neighbor's property, jump in our truck, drive home, and then walk in the. So yeah, it could be almost immeasurable as to how far you can track it, but if birds are sick, they will easily transmit to each other if they're in the same location, sharing the same ventilation. Let's see. Next question, is there a website or app that we can use to see the date stats or general locations of confirmed AI cases in Ontario, or sorry, in Canada? So I guess this goes back to the AI investigations site you have at CFA, correct?
We always share a link at the end. A list of the links.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yes, yes, the detections are on the CFA website, and there'll be a link at the end to point you there.
Yeah. Next question. I raise my own meat chickens in a chicken tractor on grass. What should we do? So for those of you that may not know what a chicken tractor is, it's more or less just a big cage on wheels that we can move pastured poultry from place to place on a pasture. So who wants to take that one?
Well, outdoor certainly comes with higher risk. It's trying to keep a separation between wild birds that carry the virus and your chickens. So it's going to be harder to keep the two populations separate. If the birds live outside, there is, at the end of the day, there is higher risk.
And I think one of the things we should mention is high risk periods include migration times, right? So in Ontario, yes, that's essentially now, like beginning of March, end of February, right till about mid-June is what my wildlife guys tell us. So that's going to be your high risk period. We'll have a lower risk period during the summer months. It'll be warm and dry, but fall migration starts mid-August, September, and goes until, I don't know. But I think we were past migration periods in December, but that's when Newfoundland got their first case, right?
Yeah. We don't know what's going to happen this year. It's a different strain. It's more aggressive. We don't know what the wild birds are going to react. Remember that in Israel, they've had about 8,000 cranes that they died because of this virus. So some are the carriers and they don't show up signs. Some may die. So
yeah,
different this year.
Another point is that not all wild birds migrate, right? So we can have resident wild birds that that do keep the virus all year long, depending on where we are in Canada.
And when you mean not migrate, we're not talking about wild turkeys, but maybe some of the Canada geese that hang out in Toronto.
Yeah.
And that kind of flows into the next question. Is it always fatal to the whole flock? So it depends on what flock we're talking about, right? So whether it's chickens and turkeys versus waterfowl.
It does. Now, this particular virus is very fatal to chickens and turkeys. Like, there is no question. It is not to waterfowl, but the mortality rates have been extremely high in the flocks that were affected.
And we're talking fast too, like from infection to mortality, we're talking days, like 2-3 days, which ironically works in our favor if you think of it that way, that you won't be able to spread the virus very far before we start seeing mortality, which, you know, so because it's so hot, we'll have a better chance of tracking it, I suppose, versus if it was something that lasted 7, 8, 14 days before we saw
For
things.
sure. It helps with early detection, for sure.
Yeah.
Keep in mind the incubation period from like 4 to 7 or 14 days. It looks like it's a shorter period of incubation this time.
Yeah, this is different than 2015. This H5N1 is hot. Okay, Jennifer has a question. How does CFIA euthanize positive flocks? So I guess we'll first sort of differentiate between commercial poultry and then small flocks. So
yeah, and it really depends on case by case, right? So, and even on backyard flocks, it really depends also on the number of birds. So on small number of birds and depending on the size of the birds, I think one important thing is it's always approved method. So literally a small number of chickens, cervical dislocation may be used. If we're talking a higher number of birds, like commercial poultry, typically we'll do whole barn CO2 gassing. So I think it is a case by case, and it's always following an approved euthanasia method.
Yeah, and we have posted methods of approved euthanasia on the PIC website with their euthanasia guidelines for commercial flocks. So they include manual cervical dislocation. We also have non-penetrating captive bolt guns like a Zephyr gun. There are some gassing, call them gassing carts that we've used for smaller batches of birds, and of course, as Cynthia mentioned, whole barn gassing. So the internet is a wonderful and a horrible place, and if you look on it, you'll see stuff that's happening in the States. We are not the US. I want to make that clear right now. We have certain methods we will prove, and other things like firefighting, like you'll see weird stuff. Firefighting foam, ventilation shutdown is talked about, and that's not something that we are willing to entertain in Ontario. I'm guessing in Canada.
I would say here for small flocks, I will consider to contact your veterinarian to discuss the method. If you feel like cervical dislocation is very emotional for you, I mean, it can be injected with euthanaol. It can be done in injectable form. But just to keep in mind that the birds are going to be very sick, and then they have to take caution of getting protected themselves for not to get the disease. So.
Let's see, next question. How do you clean a virus? So Cynthia, you mentioned about cleaning the premise and how that works. So can you explain a bit more about the cleaning, disinfection, what it does to the virus? Like how do we destroy the virus?
For sure. So actually, Lucy mentioned, the virus needs some form of organic material. So the first part of the cleaning is the removal of organic material, and typically we'll use, detergent or soap. And then it's followed with rinsing, and it's followed with the proper use of disinfectant. Avian influenza virus is sensitive to most commonly used disinfectants. So it's really the removal of the organic material everywhere is probably the longest step.
Yeah. And as far as disinfectants go, you guys can get Furcon tablets at the local PV Mart. Prevail, which some of the stabilized hydrogen peroxide products, bleach actually works well too. So the Cynthia message, and this is what we've been preaching to the commercial guys forever, a bit of elbow grease and a surfactant or a soap is needed to break up the organic matter to get it off to the point where you get to the clean surface, and then disinfect it, and then use some sort of disinfectant. We kind of mentioned already the next question is about approved methods to euthanize birds. We've gone over that. will you allow an infected premise to transport waste products to an incinerator? What is the maximum distance you will allow? That comes from my, is that my friend Carol Ann from Newfoundland? Anyways, if that's the case, so I guess, let me just explain incineration in Ontario first. Incineration is an approved method for disposal of carcasses in Ontario, but it really actually isn't, because the regulations for incineration in Ontario pretty much are at a medical waste incinerator type of level. We really don't want to be transporting infected material off farm. So I'm thinking, Cynthia, your question is, you want to keep the infected material on the farm as much as possible, right?
Yes, that is correct. That the preferred method would be to keep all the infected material on site and decontaminate on site. Having said that, it really is a case by case, and it's not. It can be done also. And again, that will be CFIA working with the the owner and the particular case or the particularity or the specificity of the premises to see if transporting contaminated material safely back to an incinerator could be an option. So it's not maybe the number one go-to method, but it also can be done.
Great. We're talking about starlings. How can I prevent them? So, like, essentially, I guess we're getting into the things of exclusion of wild birds from your birds, right? So that becomes another question that I can address in my biosecurity talk, but is there any tips or tricks? Mostly it's about, collecting spilled feed, not making, don't attract them with bird feeders, that kind of thing. Is there any other things you guys want to mention?
Screening.
Screening, yes, bird screening. So screening of your inlets to make sure birds can't get in to where your birds are. Now, that being said, if you have an outdoor coop with 1-inch chicken wire, they will still get there. So it's gonna become an issue. So it's gonna be a risk. Irene has asked, do you recommend I keep my chickens locked in their run and coop starting today in anticipation of the spring migration of wild birds? They've been locked up all winter and just want to come outside and free range. I guess the question is, if they get sick, they're gonna probably end up all dying. So what would you recommend? What would you tell Irene at this point? It is a risk. Like I think we're just trying to manage risk, correct?
It is a risk. Today we don't have detections in Ontario. Certainly, if and or when we do, then that recommendation to keep birds indoor would go right up, right? Today it's an increased risk. Again, if we start having cases in Ontario, it's a very serious consideration to keep them indoor, period.
Yep. Is there a preferred disinfectant? I think, Cynthia, you mentioned that most disinfectants will work fairly well on AI, correct?
Yep.
Irene also asked, does the migration stop in the summer? Okay, I did mention that, so that my flock could free range and then lock them up in the fall when the birds fly south. That would help with minimizing risk, I would imagine. But it depends, I guess, how this summer goes. 2015, I remember I was looking at my data from 2015 because I was around then, and actually so are you, Cynthia. I think the last US positive was middle of June. And I think the reason it stopped at that point, we didn't see more infections, is because it got hot and it got dry. So that's, and for us, middle of June is about when we see the last batch of birds moving through Ontario. Let's see. Okay. So some of the folks are saying we raised from June to August. Okay. Yeah. But like I said, stay tuned because we don't know what's going to happen. Let's see. Oh, here we got a good one here. My flock is Merrick's positive. Are they susceptible to the virus? We've had questions like this in the past. Yeah.
Are they more susceptible? They are susceptible, they are susceptible, period, to the virus. Sure, sick birds, may catch disease quicker, but like this virus is hot. It will infect poultry in a hurry.
Yeah, sick or healthy, we'll see probably close to 100% mortality with chickens and turkeys.
Yeah.
Here's a talk about indemnity, or a question about indemnity. Are backyard flock owners financially compensated if the birds are depopulated? Is the depopulation paid? Oh, is the depop paid for by the owner? So maybe we should talk about what is compensated and what isn't.
Yes. So typically, when if CFIA orders birds to be destroyed or euthanized or depopulated, there is compensation. So there's compensation for the birds themselves. The depopulation is covered by CFIA, and I believe there is also some compensation for disposal of the infected carcasses. The cleaning and disinfection is the responsibility of the flock owner.
Okay, I think that covers most of our Q&As for now. Oh, hold on, let's see. I live in a tidal lake that is home to many migratory waterfowl in the summer. Do I have my small flock chickens I do have my small flock chickens in an enclosed run normally. What should I do to my property that the migratory fowl use by the water? Do I leave, they do leave a considerable amount of feces. That is going to be one of our biggest challenges, I think. So we have someone who's got chickens in an enclosed run. So I think it's more a function of, I'd be actually more concerned about you walking through that and bringing it into the flock at that point, right? If you've got a solid roof and they're enclosed, there's probably not much chance for the ducks to interact with the birds. It'd be more that you walk it in. Any other thoughts?
And
Fully-
keep in mind
fully
to
agree.
not use the water to water to use the water for drinking for the birds from the pond.
And I would think people can walk it in, so could pests, right? So I would pay attention also to pest control.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers us for our Q&As for now. So at that point, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Dr. Lucy. And I am up next. So let me share my screen. I will pull up my my part, which is going to be my biosecurity talk for you guys. So we're going to start with a fair bit of back and forth here on what we're dealing with. So here's my contact information. My name is Al Dam. I am the provincial poultry specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm going to talk first about zoonotic or zoonosis or zoonotic diseases. So we have some diseases that can pass between livestock and poultry and humans. 2/3 of all existing human pathogens are zoonotic, and 75% of new emerging diseases are zoonotic. So if you think of diseases that are zoonotic, you'd think of things like rabies, HIV is zoonotic, and of course, COVID started in animals and jumped to humans. Some of these avian influenzas can be zoonotic also. And we get a new one that comes out every 4 months. So in the commercial industry, and you guys will have the same thing that you'll want to do on the small flock side. We want to keep it out initially, and then if we do get it, we want to keep it in, and then we want to shut it down. And that is the process that that Cynthia talked about to an extreme extent when we are dealing with avian influenza. So it reduces its impact to the whole area, not just your place. So how do we spread pests and diseases? Well, it can be by diseased birds or birds incubating the disease. So you potentially bringing birds into your flock or them getting infected in other ways. It can be brought in with other animals other than livestock. So if you let your dog run through the bush or the swamp and then come into your barn with you, that's an issue. Wild birds and other wildlife. Vermin can be an issue. Insects can be an issue. And when I say insects, like in the commercial industry, we deal with things called darkling beetles. They can be an issue that brings, or mites or anything like that. On the clothing, shoes, or hair, visitors and employees moving from farm to farm, between flocks, between wherever, we often bring disease into our own flocks. Now, how do we spread diseases? Contaminated feed, water, bedding, and soil, of course. Carcasses of dead birds can be an issue. And depending upon how you deal with your deads, you could spread the disease to other places. In the commercial industry, we always are challenged if farmers have a lot of mortality and they're putting them out in the manure pile, and I see buzzards flying around there, or coyotes, or the neighbor's dog walking with birds. We can bring disease from one place to another. We have spread diseases like infectious laryngotracheitis amongst our commercial flocks because of poor management of carcasses. Of course, contaminated farm equipment and vehicles, airborne particles, dust. So the virus can attach itself to dust and then be blown. That was part of the comment that Cynthia made about some of the travel that we've had. This infographic has been around for a long time. It talks about how we can spread diseases amongst the birds themselves, but it can also move other ways between insects, wild birds, of course, on the bottom of our shoes, and with any equipment we share amongst our various flocks. So keep that in mind. If you're a hunter, this can actually be another way you bring stuff in. If you're, we have bow hunting season coming up, or sorry, we have turkey hunting season coming up. I think some of the duck hunting is on right now. If you have birds, you really want to be careful about that. When it comes to getting to know the health status of your flock, of course, you know your flock better than anyone, we hope. You want to get an accurate diagnosis for that. If you start seeing disease, whether it's AI or anything else, of course, you don't want to take your birds to shows or auctions or enter in races. You don't want to be selling breeding stock or replacement stock. If you think you've got a disease, don't take your birds to sales barns, or don't visit other producers or allow visitors onto your premise if you think you've got disease on site. Of course, you want to restrict unnecessary visitors, potentially lock down your facility. And if it is a bad one, like avian influenza, you're going to need to notify people about this concern. Now, when it comes to birds that you're bringing on your property, we really push the concept of quarantine. So, you want to buy clean birds, you want to stay clean. When we say quarantine, what does that mean? Well, first off, knowing the health status of any birds you purchase is going to be important. So are you going to get that from someone you buy from directly versus picking up something at the auction? Source of new genetic stock, you gotta, you get what you pay for. That's all I'm going to say on that one. Find out from the owner what they've been vaccinated for, a bit of the health history. Ask around. And just assume that all birds brought onto the farm are going to be potential carriers, even if they don't have clinical signs. And that was the issue that we've talked about with things like, you buy a bunch of cull ducks and bring them home. I'm hoping they're clean, but if they're not and they're asymptomatic, and then you bring them home and you got a mixed flock and suddenly all your turkeys and chickens die, that would be a concern. Now, quarantine time and isolation from other bird groups is about 4 weeks. This allows for an incubation period or two to happen to see if anything's going to get sick. And even if they have a sickness, that they can get over it, and then they'll be in the better shape. So if you brought something home from an auction, let's just say, and it had avian influenza, in quarantine, it would probably die there before impacting your other birds. That's the hope. Hopefully it hasn't spread. But that's a part of the issue we want to make sure we talk about when we talk about how do you do quarantine properly. And often that means not just a separate pen or a separate room or whatever, but separate ventilation. We also want to talk about, so no common ventilation, diligent management and sanitation to prevent the spreading of pathogens, separate boots, separate clothing, potentially separate equipment. And feeding and handling of these birds at the end of the day is, so if you have a quarantine facility or a pen or a part of the barn that's separate, when you do your chores, you want to make sure that's the last flock you go into, the last birds you feed, the last birds you clean at the end of the day. And of course, wash your hands. I have a picture of a boot dip here. That's a fantastic way, if it's managed properly. I have stepped over foot baths in the past because they're brown. That means they're not working, right? If you're using Virkon tablets in a foot bath, it should be pink. Foot baths are only as good as when they're clean. So if you don't change your foot bath frequently, it's not going to work. And in fact, it could spread disease. I know some folks have stopped using Virkon and use pool pucks because it's a slow release chlorine and you can smell it. So you know it's working and it's there. But if you're not going to change it, I'd rather you just not use a foot bath and do a change of boots. When it comes to other things, yeah, internal external parasites can be an issue. Vaccination if necessary, and we've mentioned this is not an option with highly pathogenic avian influenza. You get it, the birds are going to die, and chances are they're going to die before CFA is even able to get there to depopulate them. Once again, this is the whole thing. You know, if it's a disease that's treatable, you'd like to resolve that problem before you add it to the rest of your flock. And of course, sanitation and transportation of crates or any equipment is going to be important. So if you're bringing birds back from a show, you know, make sure the carriers are clean, make sure you're taking the papers out. Okay, so take home message, you want a flock history as accurate as possible for new purchases, establish your quarantine facility for all new or returning birds, right? So if you take birds to a show and you come back, make sure you have a quarantine facility, have a plan for feeding and handling birds in quarantine, resolve any issues, clean and disinfect, and during high-risk periods, we're going to ask you to limit or avoid. The recommendation is avoid shows, auctions, buy and sells, et cetera, et cetera. And what is a high-risk period? It could be we're in an active disease outbreak. It could be spring migration period. We are watching and hoping that it doesn't get to the point where we've got multiple outbreaks in the province. So when it comes to how do you manage this, you know, there's lots of things you can do. And you know, in the commercial side, we use something called the Danish entry system, where this is the outside. So outside of this area, you'd walk outside out from the outside in. We would consider this the dirty area. The clean area is actually where the birds are. So you'd sit yourself down on the bench, kick off your outside shoes, swing your feet over, step in the boots that goes inside and your whatever clothing, and do whatever. You consider the barn clean or your coop clean. You're gonna have to figure out what's gonna work for your property and your farm and your coop or your flock. In some cases, you may not have the ability to put Danish entry system in, but maybe just to change your boots at least, or something that'll work for what you guys are doing. Of course, going into the area where live birds are is the highest risk. So if there's an option of being able to feed your birds without stepping into the pen, that would eliminate some of the risk of you tracking something in, washing your hands or using hand sanitizer upon entry and exit. So, you know, this is the whole concept of you can actually carry something into the birds. So that's why we want you to wash your hands before you handle the birds and after you handle the birds. And of course, anything you bring into the pen is going to have to be sanitized also. Now, when it comes to footwear, these plastic booties, I buy them by the case because I could potentially be in multiple barns over the course of a week. These, of course, are extremely dangerous this time of year when it's icy out. So is this an option for you? Potentially, but like I said, when I use plastic boots, I may be walking through the yard in my street shoes, and as I step into the barn, I'll put a pair of boots on as I step into the threshold of the barn, so I don't end up breaking my ankle walking there from the car or the truck. But this, this might be an issue for visitors or whatnot. But as I said, you want to clean and disinfect your footwear or wear disposable boot covers. And that includes, like, if you have specific boots, you want to dunk them in disinfectant also on a semi-regular basis. So here's my thing about foot baths. Like I said, if you're not going to maintain them, I don't even want you using them. If you can maintain them, they have a role to play. Same with some of those the disinfectant mats that you've seen people step on when they walk into a barn. Once again, they'll work great if they're kept clean and they keep the disinfectant fresh in them. When it comes to clothing, Protective clothing needs to be clean, or disposable, or designated to the barn. So like I said, in some cases this may not work for your little operation. So, you know, potentially just, you know, if you have separate shoes to go into the barn, that's great, and a place to hang your coat outside. Like I said, I'm more concerned about what's on the bottom of your boot when you walk into your pen, so you can make it work. Now, if we get to a point where we have disease in Ontario, and you're hearing about this, so this is what we talk to our commercial folks about if they're making a farm visit, you know, go to the health challenge flock last. So, and this goes whether it's AI or anything else. If you've got, say, multiple pens or runs or whatever, and you've got a batch of birds that are sick, of your day-to-day work you're going to do, make sure you go to that pen last. If we're at the point where we're dealing with high path AI, we will be bringing disposable items onto the farm, and we will leave them on the farm. We don't want to take them in our truck and go to the next farm and then potentially contaminate that farm. You see here, we're actually spraying tires with disinfectant. That becomes almost a standard practice in the commercial industry if we have a disease outbreak in a region, where we will have feed truck guys and the chicken catchers will stop at the end of the road. They may have a small sprayer that they disinfect their vehicles with. And when I say spray and clean, it's not just the tires, but the wheel wells is what's a concern. So if, say, we have a high, you know, a highly infectious disease outbreak somewhere, it's close to your farm, but you don't have it, you're probably going to want to have a garden sprayer full of Virkon or Virox, that if someone comes to visit, you can spray the wheel wells of their car, so you're making sure that they're not bringing anything in. If we get to a point where we are setting up zones, you're going to need permission to come in and out of that zone, potentially whether it's to your farm or to someone else's flock or whatever. So that just, you know, be aware that things will ramp up in stages as the disease level goes up. We've taken this seriously enough that on February 4th, we put out this health advisory for avian influenza in Ontario. We put this in place after we got the confirmation of that commercial flock in Nova Scotia. Who are we reaching out to? Of course, the supply managed folks with big commercial barns are part of our outreach, but the industry does a really good job communicating with them. We're also reaching out to the non-regulated commercial, which is the big waterfowl, game birds, or squab farms that are out there. But then our small flock community is one that we definitely need to reach out, and that's what we're doing tonight. And that includes the backyard folks, the urban poultry, the family food program. If you're raising 300 broilers under the CFO program, there's an artisanal program that's out there too, where you can raise between 600 and 3,000 birds. Of course, the exhibition and the show poultry folks, poultry shows, the auctions, the chick dealers, feed dealers, equipment suppliers, and anyone else. We are trying to reach everyone to let them know of the risk. We've already had some meetings with some of our small flock veterinarians, and the commercial poultry vets have been talking pretty much constantly on this and looking at ways they can protect the commercial flocks and the small flocks. We've even reached out to zoos, and our wild bird folks have been talking to us, talking about some of the rehab folks, like if they're part of the rehab facility, some of the, you know, if you're doing banding, we've been talking to the hunters and conservation authorities also, because we may find that we have AI through sick and dead birds. And of course, if there's anything else, if you guys have any ideas, throw them out there too. Now, when it comes to biosecurity measures this spring, of course, we don't want you to walk the disease into your barn or your yard or your run. Report sickness to your veterinarian. Self-quarantine until a diagnosis is confirmed. And one of the things we talk about all the time in the commercial industry, and I talk about this in small flocks too, is a visitor logbook. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, let alone visited my farm last week. You're going to want to be able to tell, you're going to want to be able to know that. And part of it's going to be, if you're diagnosed with the disease, you're going to want to go through there and tell those people that visited you before that there's an issue, and maybe try and find out if one of the visitors that came onto your property, maybe maybe through your logbook, we'll figure out that they were the one that were originally sick and brought the disease to you, and also anyone else after that, to make sure that they manage and track the health status of their bird. Wild bird exclusion is going to be a big one that we're going to be pushing this spring. So that's keeping the birds out with proper screening in your inlets and making sure they don't have access to feed. Picking up spilled feed, of course, is going to be a big one. Rodent control is going to be a pretty big deal. So, and for me, it's rats are my big concern in this time period, because rats live outside the barn, they come in to feed and they go back out again. So that back and forth and in and out is what causes a problem. Mice actually live in your barn. Keeping birds inside until after spring migration is going to be a recommendation, and of course, clean, 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 and clean. And we're going to be reaching out to everyone, right? So anyway, if you got feathers, we want to talk to you. And of course, we've mentioned this before. If you see dead wild birds, contact the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. I'm going to talk about CWHC again in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about these buggers. So you got to know what you have. If you're seeing signs of rodent infestation, you're going to want to try and address that. We see bigger pressures in the fall, of course, when the rodents are looking for someplace warm to come. But if you've got feed accessible to them, they're going to be there. So how do you tell the difference between a rat and a mouse? If you don't see them, you can tell by their poop. So you'll be finding that. But rodents are going to be a problem. And if there's one thing you're going to remember about this from rodents, it's going to be thumb and little finger. And the reason I use, well, actually, no, I'm going to say something different. I'm going to say quarter and a dime, because some people have really big thumbs. A hole the size of a quarter, a rat can fit through. A hole the size of a dime, a mouse can fit through. So if you're going to rodent proof your house or your poultry operation, that's the size you got to go down to keep these pests out. So we deal with the house mouse, the Norway rat, and the roof rat. And of course, here's the thing: a mouse can fit in the hole the size of I'm going to say a little finger or a dime. A rat can fit through a hole the size of your thumb or a quarter. They spread disease, and they can spread lots of disease, from salmonella to influenzas. And sometimes they spread the disease by having the disease themselves. Sometimes the disease will just be on the animal, because they're tromping through whatever, and they bring it physically into your operation. If you can get them to swim through the foot bath, that probably would help a lot, but you're not going to do that. So that's going to be an issue. Of course, they destroy property, they spoil feed, and rats will kill baby chicks and poults too. So if you have a rat infestation now, you're going to want to get dealt with before you bring the chicks in. When it comes to wild bird deterrence, first off, don't make your property attractive to wild birds. So that's going to be things like all these things that we talked about, spilled feed, but even bird feeders and whatnot. Deterrence can potentially include harassment and other measures if you're trying to get them away from your property. It gets weird though, because with migratory birds, you get permits from Canadian Wildlife Services. That's federally, right? Because they that includes some waterfowl. For non-migratory native species like wild turkeys, that's MNR. You got to talk to them if you want to try and scare them away. And then there's some birds like pigeons that don't belong anywhere. Pigeons actually are non-native. They were introduced into North America, so they don't fall under anyone. You don't have to call anyone to try and get rid of them. Some of the things we can see besides avian influenza, like we had this bird was brought into a rehab center and it had fowl pox. Well, this does not look good. But when something like this, if you see something like this for just the dead wild birds, Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative is who we want you to bring to. That's their toll-free number there, and their website. That will be in the links that we'll have at the end of the webinar today. And they're saying a cluster of 2 small birds or 1 large one. Well, what are we concerned about when it comes to wild birds? Mostly waterfowl and shorebirds, so ducks, geese, swans, waders, and gulls. This is where we've seen it. New Brunswick just announced they found a blackback gull. I think that was positive a couple days ago or yesterday. So we're seeing it in that if you're, and you know, some of these we're seeing because they're hunted and they're being sampled as they're being hunted or banded. Some of them we're finding dead animals. So we've got the low pathogenic avian influenza and high path. I used to have in here that high path would kill the wild birds, but that's not true with this strain. Like, we are seeing some potential wild die-offs. It's the fecal oral route, of course. So if you got a million ducks floating around in a pond, they will be defecating in the pond, and that's where we'll see some of this. If your ducks are playing in the pond too, you know, that's almost a direct route. Predation can be an issue. We've seen raptors that are very sensitive to that, and in PEI they had a raptor there, and also you mentioned the one in BC. And of course the incidental infection, and that can happen with starlings or chickadees or whatever. Now, what is CWHC looking for? Well, all water birds, so whether it's waterfowl or shorebirds, all raptors, any additional scavenger species like crows or ravens, because you know they might be picking up some of the dead birds that are being found out there. A death or two or more birds of any species in a specific area. So if we see, if you go out to your pond and you see a bunch of dead birds, I would be calling CWHC. And all birds with neurological signs. So one of the things we've seen with this particular strain of AI is neurological signs, birds acting weird or different or swimming in circles or whatever. So if you see a bird with neurological signs, definitely call CWHC. This is not a Nova Scotia or Newfoundland problem. You can see from the flyways here, we're part of the Mississippi flight path. There's been a bunch of birds in this area in the US that have been positive on the commercial side and the backyard flock side. We've got a flock in Michigan that tested positive. So at the same time, the Atlantic Flyway is an issue, but you can see the Atlantic Flyway intersects with us. So my friends at Wildlife Services Canada pretty much say we should expect avian influenza flying north from the Greenland coast right to the Saskatchewan border. So we're right in smack dab in the middle of that. So just be aware. You know, so when it comes to emergency preparedness, are you ready for it? You know, are you ready to, who are you going to call? And it's not going to be Ghostbusters, but you know, it's going to be one of those things where, you know, this is my house, this is my barn, I got a little pond out here, and suddenly I find a bunch of dead ducks in my pond and I start seeing some mortality in my birds. What do? Hoping you paid attention, because you got to start making some phone calls. First one is going to be to your vet. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that we're dealing with here, Cynthia mentioned that whole 10K zone, right? So I've just taken a picture of Windsor, Essex here. I dropped the dot. There's lots of websites out there where you can actually drop a dot, draw a 10K zone. So this is Windsor, Essex. There's Amherstburg, there's Windsor. I put a dot here, drew a 10K circle. What's in there? There's a lot of small flocks in there, and I think somewhere in here there's also a turkey processing plant. Another example I picked was Grassy. So in the Niagara Peninsula, there's Grassy right there, 10K zone around that. Holy moly, there's a lot of birds in this area, both commercial and backyard flocks. So we have some pretty high densities of poultry in this province in certain areas. So just, you know, and I'm not saying like, you know, not saying that you're going to be the impacted farm, but you could be. But I would still draw that 10K circle around your place, because what happens if your neighbor here is positive with AI and you're in that 10K circle of them? You would be impacted. If you're within that 3K circle of them, it's going to be even more intense. So just be aware of that, and have an idea of who's around you will probably help. We've had folks say, well, I don't care if my birds get sick. It doesn't, you know, I just lose a few chickens. Who cares, right? Well, it's not you. Yes, you're impacted, but you impact everyone within a 10K circle of you, and that's the concern. So when it comes to a list of actions, once again, I'm going to just keep pounding this in. Biosecurity measures. Review your biosecurity measures. You know, with the vets, we said review your biosecurity measures with all your clients. Watch for the Ontario Animal Health Network small flock communications. Check the OMAFRA and CFI websites. Look at the Poultry Industry Council website, because they'll have information too. Report any dead birds to the Wildlife Health, you know, to the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. And of course, I can't say this enough: clean, clean, clean. Make sure stuff is good. And you know, if you're a vet out there and you suspect it, we want you to, you got to sample it. And if you think you're sick, of course, quarantine. This is how we're gonna get our way through this. Good biosecurity means everything in this case. And I'm gonna end with this one, because we're all in this together. We can either all screw it up or we can all make it work. Now, finally, if you're looking for more information just on basic backyard husbandry, PIC is actually putting on a small flock course in a couple of Saturdays from now. It's a Saturday morning. You get to spend the morning with me going over soup to nuts when it comes to backyard poultry. It's more based around an urban setting because we've had a lot of interest in that. But you know, if you're interested, check it out. So that's it for me. Be safe, be vigilant, take care of your birds and the rest of the industry. So there's a couple of questions. How long, when is Al going to shut up? I'm done now. And will you be sharing these slides with us after the webinar? Yes, we will. So the intent is that we will, this recording is going to be there, but when we push out the recording, we'll push out PDFs of all the slides at the same time. So finally, there's one last thing I want to go through here with you guys, and it's more about just seeing if we understand the scenarios that we are in. So we're going to go through a few scenarios just to see if you guys, so we all understand what's going to happen. So scenario one is I brought a bird home from a show, or I purchased it, now it's sick, now what happens? So is Erin on? I'm going to get her to walk through this one.
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, so if we have an issue on there, let's see. I guess let me just click through here and we'll see. So you want to talk about some of these? And
Yeah.
I'll just keep clicking?
So I guess the first thing is, you know, obviously we all know that we should be quarantining the birds when we're bringing them home, usually for about 4 weeks. So that's the first point. And then contact your vet. It's a good time now to try to establish a relationship with a vet, you know, before you have an issue. So if you can kind of look out to who's in your area, that would be great. And we'll have a link at the end for Owen to look at some vets in your area that see poultry. And when you contact your vet, be prepared to talk about your flock. So the number of birds you have, how many were sick or died, and any signs that they had before they died, and start to gather information. So where you got the bird, who's been to your property. So that's where, you know, the visitor logbook comes in, and where you've been. So if you've been to other flocks. Your vet will take a look at the situation and assess if AI is a possibility, and they may contact CFA based on that if they think there's a likelihood, and they'll instruct you further on that. CFA or your vet will likely come out and conduct swabs if they think that AI is likely as a first step. And then again, if you're positive, you'll be looking at, you know, potentially depopulating, cleaning and disinfection, and then contacting everybody who you've been in contact with. So if you were at a show or an auction, they may reach out to the show and the auction to follow up with all of the participants to, you know, potentially establish some of those surveillance zones and to see if it's spreading.
And I don't know if there's anything that Jennifer or Cynthia want to add to that. We're just like, this is how we're going to be working through the situation. This is we've just got it. Now what's going to happen? The next scenario is going to be a little different. My neighbor tested positive for avian influenza. Now what happens?
So again, you know, like Cynthia was chatting about, you'll be in a zone of surveillance there, which may include some testing and then monitoring for any disease signs. And then you're going to obviously call your vet if you see any signs and if you see any mortalities in your flock. They may instruct you, they likely will, to instruct you to not have any contact with other flocks for a certain period of time. And again, you need to be prepared to discuss where you've been or other flocks you may have come into contact with. So again, logbooks will really be handy in these situations. And then there will be some, permits for birds and things coming into and off of the property within those zones that Cynthia was talking about.
Yeah. So this is where you guys will be under the same restrictions and permitting that a commercial operation will have at that time, right? So that means if you're selling breeding stock, you're going to need to be permitted. If you're bringing feed in, if you're selling eggs, like that becomes part of this discussion with CFI that they'll be talking to you if you're in that zone. Okay, scenario 3. I found dead wild birds on my property. Uh-oh.
So your first call is going to be to CWHC and don't touch. I think it was Cynthia saying that, just to follow up on that. Call your vet if you see any signs or deaths within your own flock. And if positive, CFIA will be contacted and will likely contact you to survey your farm as well and test.
Yeah. So once again, you guys are going to be part of our wild bird surveillance. If you see stuff, please call CWHC. And it doesn't matter what it is, right? Whether it's migratory or non-migratory, that's the one window for us to get wild bird surveillance done. Okay, last scenario. My vet won't come out to my flock because they were at a flock that was AI positive. Now what?
So we'll pop this link up at the end, and I think Charlotte also has a copy of the links that she'll share. But there may be another vet that can come out in your area, which would be great. There's a list on the ON small flock site. These will be getting updated shortly, but there are some great vets on there. Can the visit wait for a couple days, or is there a tech or something from that team who may be able to come out? So again, this is where we're all going to have to kind of collaborate with each other and come up with some good solutions to keep everybody safe. And is your flock showing signs of AI? So, how we proceed is kind of going to depend a little bit on, how many mortalities you have. If you have a lot of mortality, there potentially may be CFIA coming out to get swabs instead. So, it'll be case by case a little bit.
Yep. And finally, there's going to be some links that we have here. So these are a bunch of links that Erin has put together, including some of the CFIA links, and US and USDA and APHIS links, the CWHC site, and sorry, I didn't want to do that. It's trying to go to the site. I didn't click on the right one. It's not letting me go to the next one. Let me just pull this up a different way. And one of our last slides is, other links. So we have got included some OMAFRA sites in there, the Ontario Animal Health Network. And then on the Ontario Animal Health Network, there's a bunch of infographics, plus that list that we talked about. I'm trying to find that. So that takes us to the end of the show. I think one of the questions, Charlotte just mentioned to me that people weren't talking about wanting me to shut up. It was about when the AI episode would end. That's going to be more a function of the quarantine time and getting the facility or the location clean. So that's going to be the issue, is if you're the only one in an area, until you get cleaned up, you put everyone in that zone, like everything's on standby, right? And I think can we get Cynthia or Jennifer able to confirm that, like the clock doesn't start ticking until you sign off on that C&D, right? 21 days after.
That's right.
Yeah. I think, is Charlotte, was there any other questions I missed? Oh, can you transport? Oh, okay, here's a good question. Jess has asked, can you transport a bird with suspected avian influenza to a vet? Who wants to take that one?
I can take that one, being one of the vets who would, probably deal with that. You shouldn't be taking birds off of your property if you can avoid it. So your first call would be to your vet, who would then instruct you about how to go further. And in these cases, they probably will come out to swab, so that we don't want their clinic getting contaminated, because then they will have to shut down, and they're not set up the way some of the other facilities are for doing decontamination. So best option is to call them and have them instruct you further.
Yeah. And CFI will be giving instructions to your veterinarian also, as well, the animal health lab. So there's lots of brain power waiting in the wings to help. Here's a good question. Could this variant morph into something worse this next spring or even this fall? Once a gaze in their crystal ball on that one. Oh, you guys are all being silent. Okay, I'll take a crack at this one. Anything is possible, but if we can, like with the wild bird populations, there's a lot of congregation, and that's where some of the mutations could happen. Like this is like our human flu that we have. The new variants, and every fall you get the flu shot. I hope you get the flu shot. But we change it up every fall because we don't know what we're going to expect. So, this could be the same thing. A few years ago, I was actually more concerned about an H5N8 variant that was circulating through Europe that never made it to North America. So that was only, like I was looking at some presentations I did for producer updates. That was 2018. I put a lot in about H5N8, and this one is an H5N1. And how long has this one been circulating, this H5N1 Eurasian strain?
It started back in 2020 in Russia and west of Asia, and it moved through Europe back in 2021, started like September.
Yeah.
So it's been like a year and a half, and like I said, Europe hasn't had a break in the summer. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope Canada is going to be in a better shape. I think if we do take all the measures and precautions, better be safe than sorry.
Yep. Anyone else? Okay, well, I think that covers our questions. I would really like to thank Charlotte and the Poultry Industry Council for helping us put this Zoom call on. And I know there was a lot to manage with this. Thank you for the folks that have spent your time with us. I'd like to thank CFIA, OMAFRA, Ontario Animal Health Network, and all our speakers. You too, Jennifer, even though you didn't have to say much tonight. Thank you for being part of it. This session was really literally organized in less than a week because we thought there was a need for that. This recording will be posted, and if there's need for another session, we can distribute through the same channels we did before. If there's need, we can put these on again on an ad hoc basis. So thank you very much. Any last comments from our panelists before we sign off for the night? Nope. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone. Have a great night. If you need to look for some more information from us in the next week as far as postings for the recording and for all the links that you saw and the presentations. So once again, have a good night and stay safe, and hopefully we won't talk to you again. Take care, everyone.